¡Suéltame! ¡No me la mato! ¡Déjalo! ¡Ayúdenme! ¡Ayúdenme!
We are talking 1985's Cemetery of Terror, or at least that is the English translation of this Mexican slasher cum zombie movie. So this one is directed and co-written by Ruben Galindo Jr. And I suspect is very influenced by the likes of Halloween and slashers in general, but it has a sprinkling of zombies in there as well. Now, there is going to be spoilers in this review. It's a 1985 movie, so, you know, there you go. But I have to kind of talk about some spoilers to really get my teeth into these critiques here, so you've been warned. So the story is a group of 6 kind of young adult students decide they're going to do some type of prank on Halloween night. And in this prank, they're going to steal this body from a morgue, or a random body from a morgue, and take it to this old abandoned house where they have found this kind of almost demonic book and do this kind of ritual on it. They just so happen to take the body of a serial killer who is himself being linked to witchcraft, and maybe even the book itself. Inevitably, they resurrect him, and this serial killer becomes essentially a kind of Michael Myers-esque slasher, but with kind of added sort of supernatural powers. And then the last kind of 10 to 15 minutes or so, we also get zombies rising from the grave and a few other kind of characters along the way, and then you got yourself a movie. So first of all, let's talk about what I think works in this movie. This really feels like it is a Mexican movie trying to appeal to an American audience, because you have things like, for example, it's rather than the Dia de Muertos, which is the Mexican holiday, you've got the actual Halloween holiday for a start. And just the kind of the characters seem like Americanized versions, really. So I get the impression here the movie is definitely trying to kind of play to that audience. The audience that obviously made the original kind of Halloween and subsequent slasher movies a success. So it is trying to kind of go for those beats. If you are a slasher fan and maybe you're looking for some kind of retro slasher action that you haven't seen, you've not checked this one out, I do think there is some stuff to enjoy here on a kind of a basic level. The kind of the cemetery setting here, which the majority of the movie takes place in, gives her a kind of a spooky environment, albeit it doesn't quite make sense when we have a kind of this abandoned house in the middle of a cemetery and things like this, but, you know, whatever. But nonetheless, it is quite a 80s-esque style kind of set, admittedly, but yeah, it's kind of quite good with lots of kind of fake cobwebs and gravestones all about the place. It has a kind of a gothic kind of feel to it. There's one strength here, which is a kind of a weakness as well, which I'll come on to, in the fact that what you think is going to be your kind of main protagonists really all kind of get killed off. So it kind of has you're not quite sure who to root for in some ways, and I have to say there is a problem with that, which I'll come on to, but on the plus side, you know, you're not getting that typical kind of like main character that you know ultimately has plot armor through the movie and is not going to get killed, the kind of the typical kind of Virginia girl type, the final girl. So this movie does have a little bit of a kind of a little zig on it when it should have zagged in regards to it really doesn't have a central protagonist, because it kind of changes the kind of the characters up as the kind of the movie goes through. And I'm going to talk about it again in the negatives. But on the plus side of that, as I say, it makes for it a little bit more kind of like interesting. Don't I go as far? Well, they should have done. Maybe I'll talk about that again. But on there is that. There is a relatively reasonable kind of attempt here for some practical gore, which I have to say, although we're not, I would say, explicitly gory, the gore that we do see on screen, I think actually doesn't look to like a bad standard, and the kind of the makeup on some sort of the wounds and some of the zombies looks quite good, and I did like kind of the way they've got the zombies kind of crawling through walls of earth and stuff like that. It's a little bit of a mixed bag in regards to the effects, and we'll go on to it again in the negatives, but I do think that at least some of the effects here kind of work okay. And it really is a product of its time. So if you're kind of wanting a you know, a pure cheesy 80s movie, then this doesn't get much more kind of like cheesy in the 80s than this one. However, let me just kind of go back to what I was saying. I think maybe the problem here is that the first half of the movie is we spend a hell of a lot of time with these kind of 6 college students, all of whom get killed within kind of like the kind of around the kind of the halfway mark for the movie. I'm thinking, oh, well, you know, we don't really have a protagonist. And we have briefly kind of seen this kind of group of kids which kind of take over the protagonist's duties in the second half of the movie. So the first half has got these kind of college students, all of whom get killed, and then the second half of this kind of group of kids where none of them get killed. So it's kind of like, you know, this would have been a little bit better if we kind of had mixed it up a bit. And you've also got this kind of, this doctor who is obviously going to remind you of Halloween and the kind of the Loomis character here, who we see kind of every so often through the movie, but he has so little screen time until right at the end. You don't really get much of him as a kind of a character, so I don't think you could really class him as a protagonist. And he just kind of seems very kind of ultimately one-dimensional and knows a hell of a lot about what's going on without really kind of any kind of backstory or setup for it. So the kind of the whole I think main problem with the structure of the movie is the structure. There's simply not a good structure here. Because it just doesn't have a kind of a central protagonist that you follow. It spends half the movie with characters that ultimately become cannon fodder, and then kind of introduces a new lot of characters that we really haven't got to know, and then has this kind of like this kind of saviour character really, who again isn't particularly established and is particularly one note and really just a kind of a straight rip-off of the Loomis character from Halloween. So, if you've got the Loomis character, obviously you've got to have the Boogeyman character as well. And the kind of the main bad guy here is this kind of Satanist style dude that the kind of the college students resurrect. And I have to say, it's one of the most kind of uninspired kind of Boogeyman kind of style characters you've ever seen. It's a dude with a beard with a little bit of makeup on. Very uninspired. Yeah, he kind of just looks like some homeless guy, if we're being completely honest. And his kind of main weapon is that he seems to slash people with his hands, but he hasn't got like any type of weapons. And he just got, and I'll be quite frank with you, fairly chubby hands. I'm thinking, how was he kind of slashing people with like they kind of got like bladed weapon kind of cuts on them and things like that with his just his kind of hands. And then we have these kind of ill-defined sort of supernatural powers that can kind of close doors and levitate objects that work in some instances. For example, we see a guy trying to use an axe, and the axe is kind of levitated out of his hand and ultimately kills the guy. And then someone else uses it and that doesn't happen. So it's kind of like, it's not consistent. This movie just seems like it's kind of just hodgepodge together. And the effects, like I mentioned, are mixed, because I like some of the zombie designs here, but our main protagonist, I say, is pretty weak in regards to a scary looking dude, just like some guy with a beard and great, you know, crazy hair. Brilliant. And then some of the zombies as well. The zombies just seem to come out of nowhere, and there's just zombies. The last 10 minutes, oh yeah, zombies come out of the ground as well. For no real reason. We don't really know why, they just come out. And they come out with this kind of like these disco lights coming out behind them through the kind of the crypts and stuff like that. It's very cheesy. You know, it doesn't really seem pointless. And then we have these silly kind of plot elements in here that are kind of Loomis style character says to one of these kids, "I'll use this crucifix to kind of repel the zombies," and this kid does it, and it works, but the cemetery is full of crucifixes, either the tombstones and things like that, which seem to have no effect on them. It's just like a little bit of a slapped together movie, to be brutally honest. There's some entertainment value here for some kind of like cheap, low budget, and quite frankly, not particularly well thought out scares. But ultimately, it's a little bit of just a thrown together movie, trying to kind of, I think, cash in on the the slasher kind of craze, but trying to add some zombie elements to it as well. It doesn't really make any sense why these college kids think it would be a good idea to steal a corpse and do this kind of ritual. They just do it. They just so happens they go in this this house, which happens to have this kind of satanic book lying around, which happens to be the kind of like this the property of this deceased, the kind of like lunatic and stuff like that. We don't really know why the kind of the Loomis style character is so intent on trying to kind of like burn the corpse. It's never really established. It just goes, oh, we got to do it because of reasons. So it's just a bit of a mess. It's still enjoyable to a degree. If you really do have very kind of low expectations, if you just want some Z-grade kind of trash to watch, then you can enjoy it for what it is. But critically, I'll have to say it's a bit of a mess. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.